What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another installment of Doc and Caveman's NBA Draft Profiles. Today, we are going to be discussing Johnny Davis. As always, you're here with Dr. Fantasy and my co-host, the Fantasy Caveman. We're going to dive right into Johnny Davis, who last year was a consensus All-American, 6'5", 194 pounds, all Big Ten or a Big Ten Player of the Year as well. He was a sophomore at the University of Wisconsin, averaged 19.7 points per game, 8.2 rebounds, a little over 2 assists, shot 80% from the free throw line. Those were some of his highlights. So, Caveman, kick it off. What do you see as Johnny Davis's strengths?
Ooh, I'm just gonna mention a couple things because I've been waiting all day to hear what you have to say about Johnny Davis here. So, the couple things I'll mention is I honestly believe he is the best defensive guard in this draft by far, and I don't think it's that close. He had a very high motor, can guard three positions well. So there's really not there's. I'm sure I'll let you talk more about that. But the last thing I want to mention before I kick it over to you is his stats this season. You mentioned those stats. Very solid. His little 19-8 to it's his percentages versus top 25 teams this season. I'm not sure how many games this is, but I imagine it'd be more than a couple because Wisconsin played a lot of quality opponents this season. 25.6 points, 9.1 rebounds, 2.2 assists, shot 40% from three, and 54% overall. So, if you talk about, getting your rising up to the competition, so he definitely did that in a big way. What do you got? Because I got more, but I want to see what you throw out there.
I guess I'm becoming that predictable, but Johnny Davis will be the first guaranteed member of my all starting five this draft season. I'm putting him right up there. Scotty Barnes was my boy last year, and I'll put him right up there with Scotty Barnes, who was the NBA's Rookie of the Year. So I guess that's not a terrible comparison. But yeah, he's got everything that you need. He's a great leader. I always love to see that in my players. You mentioned the defensive versatility. One of the things that's also really encouraging is not only is he good on ball, but he's also a great off-ball defender. He understands the system that he's playing in and spacing, and you can teach a guy that, but it's good to see him have that kind of defensive IQ. Another thing you have to mention, especially offensively, is he took a huge leap from his freshman to sophomore season. And I feel like I mentioned it a few times with other players, but I love seeing that kind of improvement because that means a guy's work ethic typically off the court is at a high level as well, which I still don't think that you can teach personally. Offensively, he's got a few strengths. It's definitely not the strongest part of his game, even with averaging almost 20 points a game. I don't know. It's going to be the biggest differentiator, whether he's a star player or just a really solid role player, is if his offensive game ever truly develops. But as of right now, he can get to the rim. He knows how to do that. He's got a pretty solid mid-range game. He can pull up there. It's a little classic. He's an in-between player where he's not stretching it out to the three-point line. I feel like I haven't mentioned anybody's motor really in a positive way so far this draft season. So he'll be the first one that gets my stamp of approval on his motor. He's got the heart and soul to be, even if he doesn't live up to all-star potential, where he's, Jimmy Butler with his energy and effort and ability to score. He's still like a Jay Crowder, Bobby Portis kind of guy that just brings a ton of energy as a role player. So he's got all the This is the kind of guy who I think will be a part of a championship sometime in his life. Will it be as a key player? I mean, that's to be determined, depending on his development. But he's a guy that I see at some point being a part of a championship team.
Yeah, and the other thing I really want, as I was waiting to see if you were going to bring it up or not, is as his, because let's be real, Wisconsin lacked that scoring outside of
Yeah.
Johnny Davis last season. They made it as far as they did because of Johnny Davis, and that's the reality of the situation. He was their entire offense. Their entire offense was around him. He had a 34% usage rate at Wisconsin, which is high to say the least. Even with, and you see a lot of guys. I'm not going to mention his name. This is your guy. I'm not going to bring that guy's name up, but you see a lot of guys in the NBA these days. When they're carrying so much of the offensive load, you see their defense slip. It's just kind of, but that's the thing. Johnny Davis is very unique. Like, that is not the case with Johnny Davis at all. He is an excellent defender, even with the high usage offensively. And what's interesting now is, obviously, at the NBA, he's not going to be asked to carry that kind of load.
No.
So I think it's possible for him to get even better than he is now defensively. And if that's the case, we're talking like we're talking about a lot of all defensive teams in his future. So I think he has that in him. So I'm really excited to see, how he looks without having so much of the offensive burden on him.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. And I think early in his career, he might be relied on more defensively, putting more energy on that side. So as he's developing his offensive games, I think that's how he's going to get minutes early in his career. It's just a lockdown defender, which is not necessarily a bad thing because it gives him the opportunity to continue to refine his offensive game. We'll talk about his offensive game a little more. Speaking of weaknesses, I already kind of mentioned some of it. He's not a consistent three-point shooter. It's not a big part of his game right now. Will it become a bigger part of his game? To be determined. I mentioned his free throw percentage, which was really, really good. So that shows some potential there. He doesn't have a great handle. He's not going to be a primary ball handler. It's funny when you watch it. There's some people that love his playmaking ability and some people who think that it could be improved upon. So I think that's kind of to be determined at this point. But how much of a playmaker can you be when you don't have that much talent around you? Sorry, Wisconsin. I mean, you have to at least bring that up. And then I think the only thing right now, a few people have knocked his size. I don't know if I'm willing to list as a weakness necessarily, because he plays a lot bigger than his weight. If you watch him, I wouldn't have had him pegged at 195. He just looks and plays bigger than that. So I don't necessarily see it as a knock. We'll see if that's the case at the NBA level, but a lot of it, I mentioned some of his defensive IQ. He just doesn't have a natural feel right now on offense, and I think that he's not going to be relied on, like you said, in the NBA to be a primary offensive threat. So he's going to have to learn what his role is within an offense.
Yeah, you mentioned all of his weaknesses are pretty much on the offensive end. There's not really much you could say about his game defensively as a weakness. Building on the issues from three, what was frustrating about Johnny Davis is that I watched a few games, and one game I watched, he took like 2 threes, right? And then the very next game, he's taking 8 threes. He needs that consistency, just in shot selection. I think that's the big area for him. I think overall his handle and his playmaking ability, I'm not too worried about it because that's not going to be his role at the next level. I mean, maybe he has some potential as like a secondary ball playmaker. I think he's showing a little bit of flashes there, but that's not going to be a huge part of his game, so I'm not too worried about it. I mean, if I would just focus on like the shot selection and just his overall consistency. And the last thing I want to mention, he does, and this is why I noticed him. He gambles it too much, and then he has great recovery speed. Don't get me wrong. He knows how to get back into a play defensively, and it's part of the reason why he's so good defensively. But I think at times he gambles because he's now banking on his recovery speed, and that he gets. I've seen on a couple of occasions where he did get burned because he relied maybe too much on his recovery speed. So I think that he doesn't need to gamble that much to be effective defender. He doesn't. I don't. I think he's gonna. I think he's gonna get coached to not gamble as much defensively. So I think that will be kind of like coached out of him in a sense. But that is something I noticed while watching him.
Yeah. All right, let's go over to ideal fits then. The range that I see from him is anywhere between, I'll say, 7 and 11. Though that's the range that I personally have for him. On
Yeah,
the upper
definitely.
end, I think that Portland would be a good fit for him. I've mentioned them several times, but they're terrible defensively. Obviously, wouldn't have to be a primary ball handler there, so they could use a wing player. So I think he'd be a nice fit there for Portland. On the low end, I have him with the Knicks at 11. I think that he could provide, and he doesn't have the same skill set offensively, but the Knicks missed Reggie Bullock a lot last year, and I know that sounds silly to say, but he was the heart of that team defensively, and we're seeing the impact that he's had defensively with the Mavericks, which was one of the reasons that I loved that move. And I think they need a guy like that that can be their heart defensively. And I think Johnny Davis could provide that to the Knicks. So I think that would be, if he was there at 11, I think they should be really excited about it because I think it's a good combination of what they need, and he still can develop offensively over the next few years. In between, you have the Spurs, who, I mean, I wouldn't mind if he played for the Spurs. That wouldn't be a wouldn't be a pick that I'd be
It can't.
upset about.
It wouldn't be worse than last year's pick. We won't mention his name.
No. And I mean, the Spurs do have 3 first round picks. So I don't want to say with Johnny Davis that you're not getting upside, but I do think you're also getting a pretty safe floor. So I think the Spurs can afford to take a really safe player with upside. And even if he doesn't turn out to be a top tier player, they're getting a contributor. I mean, I think that he has upside, but not as much as some of the other guys. I've seen AJ Griffin fall to the Spurs a few times, which would semi surprise me. So you're not getting a guy with, I don't know. I don't want to say he doesn't have superstar potential because I've mentioned Scotty Barnes and Jimmy Butler and these guys that have shown flashes of star potential. So I do think he has it, but I don't think other people view it that way. But yeah, the top 3 that I had was Portland, the Knicks, and the Spurs, and he'd fit in with Washington too. Really, anybody in that range, he fits
Yeah,
in
that's
well
not
with.
saying anybody. I mean, even if he were to slip to, I mean, it seems like anybody would be a fit with the Thunder with their 95 pick. But I wouldn't hate. I would not obviously not at 2, but if he slips down to 12, which I've seen a couple a time, like literally any of these teams, you just could use. I mean, what team in the NBA couldn't use an defender like Johnny Davis? Like, his defensive ability. He at worst his floor is like he's gonna be in the NBA for a long time with his defensive ability. Maybe his offensive game doesn't pan out to the point where he's like a star player, but I think for 15 plus years you're gonna get one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. So, in this range, I think that's a pretty good floor.
Yeah, I would agree, and he has a healthy amount of upside if he's ever able to develop his offensive game. So I think it's a nice combination. But NBA comparisons. I mean, I mentioned It's funny. I went back to my notes last year to see what I said about Scotty Barnes, who was my boy last year, and there's a lot of similarities to what I said between the two of them. He's 2 inches shorter than Scotty Barnes, and they'll probably play slightly different roles offensively. But even the 3-point shooting, Scotty Barnes averaged a little less than 1 3-pointer made per game last year. It was 0.8, I think. Johnny Davis, I believe, averaged 1.2 threes a game, I wanted to say, last year that he made. So actually pretty similar. Just the defensive ability, the motor, I think there's a lot of similarities there. A few other guys that I listed out on, and I don't want to say the low end because he's still a young player, but similar to what we saw with Herbert Jones last year with the Pelicans, able to provide a really strong defensive presence, a Jonathan Isaac kind of guy. One of the ones I saw pop up several times was Kentavious Caldwell Pope. So, maybe that's his floor, just a long-term rotational defensive player. But yeah, I had Isaac, Herbert Jones, Scotty Barnes. I threw Draymond in there as well if he's ever able to develop into more of a playmaker. But that's what I got.
Yeah, I mean, he reminds me a little bit of another guy from last year that reminds me of some Chris Duarte elements in his game as well. And then the other guy I don't hate. I saw float around a time or two that I never really would have thought of. That's Davion Mitchell from last year as well. Just it's in terms of being a great Davion Mitchell is one of the best defensive guards out of last year's draft. And in my opinion, got snubbed for the All Rookie team, but that's discussion for another day. And then I put down Matisse Thybulle with better offense.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But Bouknight with better defense.
Okay.
So,
James Bouknight barely played last year, so I don't know if that's good.
Bouknight was also in a horrible situation.
Yeah, that pick was very strange.
But yeah, that's what I have.
Okay. Nice comparisons there, and it'll be interesting to see where he ends up going. Like I said, I don't see him slipping past the Knicks, but it's just hard at this point of the draft to find we talked about a guy like Shaden Sharp, who his floor is arguably pretty darn low. I mean, just a complete bust. And I don't know if he'll necessarily become that, but it could happen. Do I think that Johnny Davis has the potential to be a complete bust? I don't, honestly. If you can play defense at a high level, you'll at least carve out a nice long career, like you mentioned earlier. So, but at the same time, he still has the upside to be Jimmy Butler, maybe. Who knows what he develops into offensively. So,
Yep.
think that's it for Johnny Davis. Next, we have, I don't even remember. Abaji is coming up next from Kansas. So we will discuss that next and see you guys then.